It was past midnight when someone pounded on Ryan's front door like they were trying to break it down. He opened it and went still. Emma Claire's younger sister stood in the hallway, soaked from the rain, eyes red and swollen, one hand pressed flat against the doorframe to keep herself upright. In her other hand, she held a marriage registration form crumpled at the edges from how tightly she had been gripping it. She looked at him and said the words that made his stomach drop. "If you don't marry me before Saturday, they're going to take my son." Ryan's life had shrunk down to a manageable size, and he had made peace with that. Every morning looked the same. Wake up before 6, make breakfast, pack Lily's bag, drive her to school, come home to an apartment that was too quiet, and work until it was time to pick her up again. He had built a routine so tight, there was almost no room left for anything to go wrong. That was the point. After the divorce, routine was the only thing he trusted. Lily was 5 years old, and she still reached for his hand every time they crossed a street. That detail mattered to him more than he could explain. He had failed at a lot of things in the past few years, his marriage chief among them. But every time Lily grabbed his hand without thinking, he felt like he might still be doing something right. He read to her every night before she slept. He learned which cartoon characters she loved and which ones she found boring. He showed up every single day without exception. Claire was out of the picture in all the ways that counted. They shared custody on paper, but Lily spent most of her time with Ryan. He did not talk badly about Claire in front of Lily. He did not talk about Claire at all if he could help it. The marriage had ended badly, not dramatically. Not with shouting, but with the slow and exhausting realization that two people can live in the same house for years and still be completely alone inside it. By the time they signed the papers, there was almost nothing left to grieve. Emma was Claire's younger sister. Ryan had met her a handful of times during the marriage at holiday dinners, at a birthday party once briefly, at a family gathering he could no longer fully picture. She had been the kind of person who stood out without trying loud opinions, paint-stained jackets, the sort of restless energy that made everyone else in the room feel slightly sedentary. He had not seen her in 5 years. After the divorce, the connection dissolved naturally the way most things connected to Claire eventually did. He had not thought about her much. He certainly had not expected her to show up at his door past midnight in the middle of a rainstorm. But that was what she did. What Ryan did not know, what he only pieced together later, was that Emma had been standing in the hallway outside his apartment for nearly 20 minutes before she knocked. She had found his address through a mutual contact, taken 2 buses to get there, and stood in the corridor with the folded marriage registration form pressed flat against her chest, working up the nerve to raise her hand and knock. She was not there because she was weak. She was there because every other door had already closed. Ryan stepped back from the doorway without saying anything and let her inside. She was dripping on his entryway floor. He handed her a towel from the bathroom without asking and watched her press it against her face. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry, but only just. She sat down on the edge of his couch, like she wasn't sure she had the right to take up more space than that. "I have a son," Emma said. "His name is Owen. He's 3 years old." Ryan did not respond immediately. He sat down in the chair across from her and waited for the rest. Emma explained it steadily, which surprised him. She had clearly rehearsed this part. Owen's father was a man named Jordan, someone she had been with briefly years ago, who had disappeared before Owen was born and made no contact for the first 3 years of Owen's life. Emma had raised Owen entirely on her own. She had worked, budgeted, figured it out without asking anyone for anything. Then 2 months ago, her grandfather had passed away and left her a modest inheritance. Nothing significant by most standards, but enough to be noticed. Jordan had noticed. Within weeks of the inheritance becoming public record, he had filed for custody. "He doesn't want Owen," Emma said. Her voice stayed flat, but her hands tightened around the towel in her lap. "He never wanted Owen. He wants leverage. He wants access to that money, and Owen is the only way he can get it. Ryan leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. What does your lawyer say? Emma looked at him directly for the first time since she sat down. She says, I'm going to lose. Not because I'm a bad mother, she made that clear. But because Jordan has resources I don't have. He has a stable income, a house, a long-term partner. On paper, he looks like the better option. And I'm single. I rent a one-bedroom apartment, and I have no family support structure that I can point to in court. She stopped. My lawyer said the one thing that could shift the balance is if I had a stable two-parent household, a husband, a home that looks on paper like a family. Ryan stayed quiet. I know how this sounds, Emma said. I know exactly how this sounds. I went through every other option before I came here. I did. There is no one else I trust enough to ask, and no one else I could ask without owing them something I'm not willing to owe. She set the marriage form on the coffee table between them, face up. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking for anything real. I'm asking you to help me keep my son. Ryan looked at the form. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. He thought about Lily asleep in the next room, the small shape of her under the blanket, her hand probably curled under her cheek the way it always was. He thought about what it would mean for someone to tell him legally, formally, that he was not the right environment for her. That some stranger with a better-looking financial profile had more right to her mornings than he did. The thought sat in his chest like something physical. He thought about a 3-year-old boy named Owen, who had never once had a father show up for him, and whose father was now showing up only because there was something to gain. Ryan picked up the form. He read it through once, slowly, without skipping anything. Then he set it back down on the table and looked at Emma. What's the court date? He asked. Thursday, Emma said. The hearing is Thursday. We'd need to file before then. Ryan stood up. He walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and came back with a pen. He did not make a speech about it. He did not ask Emma to explain herself further or convince him more completely. He sat back down, uncapped the pen, and signed his name on the line at the bottom of the form. Then he set the pen down on top of it and pushed it back across the table toward her. Emma stared at the signature. Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly. More like the sensation of a weight shifting, redistributing itself into something she might actually be able to carry. Ryan, you said Saturday was the deadline to file, he said. That gives us 2 days. Tell me what the lawyer needs from us, and I'll be there. Emma nodded once. She picked up the form and folded it carefully along the original creases, like she was afraid of damaging it now that it mattered. She stood to leave, and Ryan walked her to the door. She was almost through it when she turned back. I stood outside for 20 minutes before I knocked, she said. I want you to know that. I almost didn't. Ryan looked at her. I know, he said. But you did. He closed the door after her and stood in the entryway in the dark for a moment. Then he walked back down the hall, pushed open Lily's door quietly, and looked in at her. She was exactly as he had imagined. Small shape hand, curled under her cheek, breathing slow and even. He stood there long enough to be sure she was fine. Then he went to bed, knowing he would not sleep much and not entirely minding that. The paperwork was filed the next morning. Emma's lawyer submitted everything before noon, and by the time Ryan picked Lily up from school that afternoon, the marriage was legal on paper. He did not tell Lily what it meant. He told her they were going to spend some time with a friend of his, a woman named Emma, who had a little boy named Owen. Lily accepted this the way 5-year-olds accept most things, without much question, already thinking about something else before he finished the sentence. Emma's apartment was small and lived in. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator at uneven heights, a basket of toys near the couch that had clearly been kicked aside rather than packed away, and a low shelf along one wall, stacked with children's books that had been read so many times, the covers had gone soft. Ryan noticed all of it in the first 30 seconds. The place looked exactly like what it was, a home built by one person doing the work of two for 3 years without stopping. Owen was standing behind Emma's leg when they arrived, one hand gripping the fabric of her jeans. He was small for 3, with dark eyes that moved between Ryan and Lily, without committing to either. Lily crouched down to his level, without being prompted, the unself-conscious confidence of a child who had never been made to feel like a burden, and said, "I like your truck," pointing at the plastic toy in his hand. Owen looked at the truck, then back at Lily, and held it out toward her. That was all it took. Ryan and Emma stood side by side, watching the two of them settle onto the floor of the living room together, and neither of them said anything for a moment. It was the first time since the night at his door that the situation had felt less like a transaction and more like something that might actually be survivable. They fell into a loose routine over the following days. Ryan brought Lily over in the evenings after work. Emma cooked, or Ryan cooked, depending on who had more energy. The 4 of them ate at Emma's small kitchen table, which was only meant for 2, but fit for if nobody minded the elbows. After dinner, Lily and Owen watched cartoons, while Ryan and Emma sat at the counter and went over whatever the lawyer had sent that day. Documents, questions, things they needed to align on before the hearing. It looked from the outside like a family working through an ordinary evening. Ryan was aware of how intentional that appearance needed to be. What he was less prepared for was how little effort it actually required. Owen warmed to Ryan slowly but completely. By the 4th evening, he had stopped hiding behind Emma when Ryan walked in. By the 6th, he was dragging a picture book across the room and dropping it in Ryan's lap without explanation, the way children do when they have decided you are trustworthy enough to be useful. Ryan read to him. It was the same thing he did with Lily every night, and the motion of it, the sitting down, the opening of the cover, the small body leaning in, felt familiar in a way that made something in his chest go quiet. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. 2 nights before it, Ryan was staying late at Emma's to review the final documents her lawyer had prepared. Lily and Owen had both been asleep for over an hour. Emma had the papers spread across the kitchen table and was going through them for the 3rd time, making small marks in the margins with a pencil, when Ryan came back from checking on the kids and found her sitting with her face turned toward the window and her hand pressed flat over her mouth. She was not making any sound. That was what struck him. First, how completely silent it was, how much effort she was clearly putting into keeping it that way, so she wouldn't wake the children. Her shoulders were pulled in tight, and her eyes were wet, and she did not look at him when he sat down across from her. Ryan did not say anything. He got up, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. When it was ready, he poured 2 mugs and pushed one across the table toward her without a word. Emma wrapped both hands around the mug. After a moment, she let out a long, controlled breath. "I keep running the numbers," she said quietly. "Jordan has a house, a 2-car garage, a partner who stayed, and I have a 1-bedroom apartment and a marriage that's been legal for 6 days. She looked down at the mug. "I know my lawyer thinks we have a case, but I also know what the courtroom is going to see when it looks at both of us." Ryan turned his own mug in his hands. "What does Owen think of Jordan?" Emma looked up. "He doesn't know who Jordan is. Jordan has never been in the same room as him." "Then the courtroom is also going to see that," Ryan said. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she set down the pencil and leaned back in her chair, like she was allowing herself, just for a minute, to stop performing the role of someone holding everything together. She told him things she had not said in the lawyer's office about the first year after Owen was born, working night shifts, and leaving Owen with a neighbor, about the months she had eaten 1 real meal a day to make sure Owen had everything he needed, about the inheritance from her grandfather that she had planned to use for Owen's schooling, which was now the reason all of this was happening. Ryan listened without interrupting. He did not offer solutions or reassurance. He just stayed at the table. They talked until nearly 2 in the morning, not about the case eventually, but about other things. about what it felt like to raise a child alone and love it fiercely while also being exhausted down to the bone by it. About what Ryan had felt in the year after the divorce, driving home to an apartment that had Lily in it, only half the time, the strange particular grief of a house that was sometimes quiet in the wrong way. It was the first time they had spoken to each other as themselves rather than as two people executing a plan. By the time Emma finally gathered the papers and said goodnight, something between them had shifted, not dramatically, not with any announcement, but in the way that real things shift gradually, and then all at once. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled like recycled air and floor wax. Jordan arrived with his attorney, and a woman Ryan assumed was his partner, both of them dressed carefully composed, in the way of people who had been coached. Jordan was tall and well-presented, the kind of man who understood how rooms read him. He shook hands with his lawyer at the table and did not look toward Emma once. Jordan's attorney moved quickly to undermine the marriage. He pointed out the timing that Ryan and Emma had registered their marriage less than 1 week before the hearing, and implied plainly to the court that the union was a legal maneuver rather than a genuine relationship. He used the word convenient 3 times. He was good at his job, and Ryan could see the argument landing with weight. When it was their turn, Emma's lawyer presented the documentation, the registration photographs from the evenings the 4 of them had spent together, a statement from Owen's pediatrician noting the consistency of Emma's care over 3 years. Then she called Ryan to speak. He stood at the front of the courtroom and answered the questions directly without embellishment. He said that he had known Emma for years before they married. He said that Owen was a child who was loved and stable and thriving in his mother's care. He said that in all the evenings he had spent in that apartment, he had never once seen Emma put anything before her son. None of it was untrue. That was the part that steadied him, that he could stand in front of that room and say every word with full conviction, because every word was accurate. He believed she was a good mother. He had watched her be one close enough to know. Jordan's attorney had one final question for Ryan on cross-examination. He asked how Ryan could claim a genuine marriage when the registration had been filed just days before the hearing. Ryan looked at him and said without any particular heat, "I didn't marry Emma because of a hearing. I married her because Owen needed a father in his corner, and I knew how to do that." The attorney did not follow up. Ryan returned to his seat. After both sides rested, the judge announced that a decision would be delivered within the week. They filed out of the courtroom into the gray afternoon light. Jordan walked past them without speaking, his expression unreadable, but tight around the jaw, in a way that suggested he had expected an easier morning. His attorney was already on his phone. Neither of them asked about Owen, not once. Not in passing, not at any point during the entire proceeding. Ryan noticed. He suspected the judge had too. Emma did not speak on the drive home. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city move past the window. Ryan drove and did not try to fill the silence. When he dropped her off, she got out of the car, then stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at him through the open door. "Thank you," she said, "for what you said in there." Ryan looked at her. "I meant it," he said. Emma nodded once and went inside. Ryan waited until she was through the door before he pulled away from the curb. The week of waiting had begun, and neither of them had any way to move through it faster. All they could do was go home, take care of the children, and hold the line until the court decided which direction everything would fall. The week that followed the hearing was the longest Ryan could remember in recent years. He kept to the routine work, school, pickup, dinner, bedtime, but everything underneath the routine felt suspended, like a breath held too long. He continued bringing Lily to Emma's in the evenings. It was easier, he told himself, to keep things consistent for the children during the wait. That was true. It was also true that he did not want to go back to his apartment and sit alone with the uncertainty. Emma held herself together during the days. She was careful around Owen, present, steady, deliberate in the way she had always been with him. But Ryan could see the cost of it in the evenings, after Owen went to sleep, in the way she moved through the kitchen with too much precision, the way she refilled her coffee mug and then forgot to drink from it. She was running on will, and the will was starting to show its edges. On the fourth night of waiting, Ryan stayed later than usual. Owen had fallen asleep on the couch with his head on Lily's shoulder, and neither of them had wanted to move him. Ryan carried Owen to his bed, while Emma settled Lily on the couch with a blanket. When he came back out to the kitchen, Emma was standing at the counter with her back to him, both hands flat on the surface, her head dropped forward. She was not crying. She was simply at the end of what composure could do for her. "What if it's not enough?" she said, without turning around. "Everything we did. What if the judge looks at the timeline and decides the marriage is exactly what Jordan's lawyer said it was?" Ryan leaned against the doorframe. "Then we deal with what comes next," he said. "But we don't know that yet." Emma turned around. Her eyes were dry, but the exhaustion behind them was complete. "I can't lose him, Ryan. I know that's not something I'm supposed to say out loud because it sounds like I'm not prepared for every outcome. But I can't. He's everything I built. He's the only thing I did right when everything else was falling apart." Ryan did not answer right away. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. And after a moment, Emma sat across from him. He told her something he had not said before, that in the year after his divorce, when Lily was with Claire every other week, he used to drive to the school on his off weeks just to sit in the parking lot for a few minutes. Not to go in, not to disrupt anything, just to be close. Because the distance was something he had not known how to carry, and that was the only way he had found to make it smaller. Emma listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at him with an expression he did not try to name. "You never told anyone that," she said. "No," Ryan said. "I didn't." They sat at that table until the apartment went fully quiet around them. At some point, the conversation slowed, and the silence that replaced it was not uncomfortable. Ryan looked at the toys on the floor near the doorway, the drawings on the refrigerator, the two small pairs of shoes lined up by the entrance, where Lily had arranged Owen's sneakers next to her own, without being asked. He thought about his own apartment, clean, organized, calibrated for two, and realized that what he felt when he pictured returning to it was not relief. It was the wrong kind of quiet. He did not say that out loud, but he stayed until nearly midnight, and when he finally left, he drove home slowly. The call from Emma's lawyer came on a Friday afternoon. Both Ryan and Emma were asked to come in person to hear the judge's written decision, which had been delivered to the court that morning. Ryan rearranged his afternoon, picked up Lily early from school, and dropped her with a neighbor before driving to meet Emma outside the courthouse. She was already there when he arrived, standing on the front steps, in a gray coat, her hands in her pockets. She looked like someone who had already accepted a version of bad news and was just waiting to find out which one. Jordan was inside with his attorney. He was standing near the window when they entered the room, and his posture had the looseness of someone who believed the outcome was already settled in his favor. He did not acknowledge Emma when she walked in. His attorney arranged papers on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone preparing for a formality. Emma's lawyer read the judge's written decision aloud. The judge had considered the full body of evidence, the history of Emma's sole caregiving over 3 years, the consistency of Owen's medical and developmental records, the testimony given during the hearing, and the observable pattern of Jordan's engagement with the case. The judge noted specifically that throughout the entire proceeding, Jordan's legal arguments had centered on financial stability and custodial rights, with no documentation testimony or demonstrated history of meaningful involvement in Owen's daily life. The judge further noted that the timing of Jordan's custody claim, filed within weeks of Emma's inheritance, becoming a matter of public record, had been taken into consideration. Primary custody would remain with Emma. Jordan was granted supervised visitation, the schedule to be determined by a family mediator, contingent on his establishing a documented relationship with Owen over a period of 6 months, before any unsupervised contact would be considered. The room was very quiet after the lawyer finished reading. Jordan's attorney was already leaning in to speak quietly to his client. Jordan's jaw was set hard, and his eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past Emma's shoulder. He did not look at her. He gathered his things and left without a word. Emma sat without moving for a long moment. Then she pressed both hands over her face and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and held the kind of exhale that only happens when something you have been bracing against for weeks finally stops pressing. Ryan sat beside her and did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say, and she did not need words right now. She needed the moment to be real. After a few minutes, she lowered her hands and looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was something close to calm, the particular calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from finally being allowed to feel it without consequence. "It's over," she said. "It's over," Ryan said. They stayed in that room a little longer than necessary, neither of them in a rush to move. When they finally walked out into the afternoon, the light was flat and gray, but the air felt different. Lighter in the specific way that things feel when a weight that has been there so long you stopped noticing it is suddenly gone. Emma called Owen's babysitter from the sidewalk to say she was on her way home. Ryan listened to her voice shift when she said Owen's name, steadier, warmer, already moving back toward the person she was when the fear was not running underneath everything. Ryan drove her home. When they pulled up outside her building, Emma got out and turned to face him from the sidewalk, one hand resting on the car door. She did not say thank you this time. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was direct and unguarded in a way she had not let herself be before. "Don't go back to eating dinner alone," she said. "Owen's going to ask where you are." Ryan looked at her. He thought about the apartment waiting for him, the right dimensions, the right quiet, everything in its place. He thought about Owen dropping a picture book in his lap without explanation. He thought about the kitchen table that was only meant for two, but had fit four just fine all week if nobody minded the elbows. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said. Emma nodded and went inside. Ryan sat in the car for a moment before pulling away, and for the first time in a long time, the drive home felt like a temporary thing, a direction he was moving through rather than a destination he was returning to. The months that followed moved the way good things move when nobody is forcing them steadily without drama in a direction that started to feel inevitable in retrospect. Ryan did not make an announcement. He did not sit Lily down for a formal conversation. He simply began leaving more of himself at Emma's apartment, a jacket on the hook by the door, a coffee mug in the cabinet, his phone charger on the kitchen counter, until one evening, Lily said matter-of-factly that she wanted her books there too, and Ryan drove back to the apartment and packed a bag. Owen stopped calling him by his name sometime in the late spring. It happened without ceremony. They were reading before bed one evening, the same routine they had fallen into months ago, and Owen looked up from the page and said, "Papa turn," when he wanted Ryan to read the next line. Ryan turned the page. He did not make a thing of it. But when he came out of the room afterward, Emma was standing in the hallway, and her eyes were bright in the way they got when she was trying not to let something show. Lily started calling Emma Mom. Sometime after that, a construction entirely her own, offered one morning over breakfast, as though it were the most obvious thing, which to Lily it apparently was. The wedding happened on a Saturday in early fall. Small and without much fuss, a few friends, a backyard, two children who spent most of the reception chasing each other around the legs of the adults. Ryan and Emma had already been living as a family for months by then. The wedding was not the beginning of something. It was the acknowledgement of something that had already become true, built not from romance or planning, but from a rainy night and a crumpled form, and the decision made without certainty to show up for someone who had run out of anywhere else to turn. That was where the family started. Everything else was just what happened after,